The Dr. Oba T'Shaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba T'Shaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba T'Shaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba T'Shaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba T'Shaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to the family here. See how y'all lined up here. Let me see here. Go to the top. To M. Jewel, who was the first one to click in at 9:59, Brother Ogawa, Sister LaShonda Henderson. I'm going to be calling you, ladies, so get ready for a call. Sister Robin, Sister Gloria Briscoe, Uben Tugogist. I hope I didn't mess your name up there. Fine lady. Shonda Henderson. To all of you and others who will be joining the show. You note for the last month or so, we've been doing replays. I've been doing this show now 3 years, and I don't want to become stale. And so I wanted to really take time off to reflect and think about where this show should go. And I'm still working on that. But the choice of the topic for today is giving you some idea of some overall direction, focus on leadership. And so you'll see why as we get through this and as the show develops this year. So I just want to remind people to, if you're new, to hit the red subscriber button. And if you like the show, hit the like button. And people who are watching the show, encourage the viewers to do that at different points throughout the show. I would also ask people to give some thought to some questions that you want to raise before the show is over, or if you have some while it's going on. If it's appropriate, then I'll move into that while the show is going on. So that's the first thing. The Cash App problem that we've had, where people have been making donations, and they've been coming back. That was a problem that we had. I think we've solved it. And so if you want to do donations, you'll see under this banner here, you'll see the description Cash App, and then you see $ Pan African Pub, abbreviation for publishers. So if you put that in there, Cash Pan African Pub, then that should go to the Cash App. And that was the problem before. I had some young sister over here a couple of days ago who's real computer savvy, and she solved this in 5 minutes. In fact, 3 minutes. She just went in, oh, do this, blah, blah, blah. So we'll see if it works. It should work. So this is important because I've been carrying this show financially for 3 years. It's been costly. And to keep going, I'm going to need more donations. And people have made them, and they've come back because some glitch in the system. So I think we've solved that. And whatever you can donate, it'll be helpful because I don't take corporate ads and stuff. And I've been fighting corporations and the power elite all my life. And I do not want to be in a position where they're paying me for something. I mean, they're using my site and uglifying it with their commercials, so I really don't want that. So appreciate those that tried to donate before. Come right on back. And if you want to make up for the money that was sent in before, that'll be appreciated because it'll all go to the cost of the show. I pay a person who is a computer tech person for me. Ogawa's done a lot of work for free, and I've had a few other people have, but Ogawa's done a lot. But I still am relying on that. And then there are other costs for the show. Sometimes I'll do a cinematographer piece where we have historical background, in which case I'm paying a filmmaker, which I did when we did the Garvey thing, and I've done on a number of shows. So this will help. So look at that, and that'll be appreciated. Before getting into today's show, I wanted to deal with the Palestinian issue, and particularly now, the fact that the government of South Africa has charged Israel, the Zionist state, with the charge of genocide. And this is extremely important. And the Israelis have not responded to these charges before. But in this particular case, they have responded because they realize that there's a world in uproar against the actions that they've taken. And so they brought in their own lawyers, but they got slick. I know they went and asked the Germans to provide a lawyer. In other words, the people that genocided them, who now, have paid them reparations as if you could ever pay for 6 million lives lost. They figured that along with their own defense, this would be a good defense, that the genocider, the Germans against the Jews, can come in and say, this isn't genocide. Well, let's see. I mean, it's pretty obvious what's going on. But so there are many ways to define genocide. And this one I'm using simply because it's the one that this court hearing at The Hague is going to use in measuring whether or not what the Israelis are doing is genocide. So basically, Article 2 from the United Nations Conventions on Genocide which is a compromise definition because it was something agreed to by the various nations, and America took its time signing on to it. They've also signed on to it. And they took their time because America is a genocidal nation, you know. So this is their definition of genocide, and there are better definitions. So I'm not going to get into the intellectual part of this. I think that it's pretty clear, when you're going out to do in a whole group of people, you don't have to get too sophisticated in your definitions, but this is the one that the United Nations has put forward. Article 2 of the Conventions on Genocide define genocide as a crime committed with the intent to destroy a national, ethnic, or racial group in whole or in part. Now, this definition does not include a definition that would say also that genocide involves the destruction of a people's culture or an attempt to do so on some scale. So this definition doesn't include culture. It doesn't include genocide directed against a political group. And so it's a compromise definition. Obviously, it should include that. So this was a definition reached by nations when they were forming the United Nations. And this is basically coming from the Human Rights Committee of this declaration. Now, under the Genocide Charter, any one of 5 acts would be sufficient to constitute genocide under this definition. 1 is killing members of a group. So that's 1. 2, so all it requires is 1 of these. So killing members of a group, obviously not 2 or 3, a massive level of killing. 2, causing serious bodily harm to members of a group. So this is interesting because then this definition of genocide isn't just about eliminating a people physically. It's also causing great harm to them. And then the third one, just one of these have to be done to qualify as genocide. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And then 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And then the 5th one, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So any one of these would constitute acts of genocide. Now, it's pretty clear that over more than 3 months of continuous bombing of the Palestinians, where most of their housing has been destroyed and the people within that housing who are buried under rubble. The constant media report is now in the 20,000s. It's got to be well over 100,000. It's got to be in the hundreds of thousands. And they will sometimes say, well, of course, we haven't counted all the people under the rubble, blah, blah, and wherever the Israelis have told people to move, they bomb those places. So there's been no safe area for the Palestinians, and they're confined, in this case, to Gaza, and in the other case, to the West Bank. They can't leave. So when they're doing the bombing, for the most part, there was no place to go. So this was, and this is out of a population of a couple of million people. And this is under circumstances in which these people have faced bombings, shootings, being placed on a diet of approximately 1,400 calories a day, which nutritionists consider to be a starvation diet. Now, for someone who knows anything about longevity, that is the calories for longevity if you have the proper amount of meat, green and yellow vegetables, and fruits. And the proper amount of meat is no more than this, very small. I'm on that, and I've been on it for a long time. That increases your life expectancy by 30%. It slows down aging. What you see here, the way I look, that's the way I feel. I'm never tired, blah, blah. But that ain't what the Israelis are faced with, because that 1,400 calorie diet is sometimes no calories, but even when it's 1,400, it ain't no balanced diet. And everybody can't live on that diet, because if you are a heavy construction worker, an athlete, or a person expending a huge amount of energy, you're going to need more calories than that. So it's a starvation diet. It's deliberate. And so it's not just what's been happening over the last 3 months, but the people of Palestine have been subjected to what the Israelis call mowing the lawn. That is one of the indications of genocidal intent, that you've taken people and taken them outside the category of being a human being. They referred to them as rats and vermin, much like Trump has said that the people who are coming into the country, and by this he also means the black, brown, red, and yellow people inside this country, are poisoning their blood, the blood of white people. That's genocidal talk, by the way. When the Rwandans went out, the Hutus went out to kill Tutsis, that's what they called them. And they learned this from white people. And that's what the Nazis called the Jews. And that's what this country has defined blacks and Native Americans as. So, and I think it's very clear, 90% of the Native Americans in this country were genocided. And the slave trade and colonialism in Africa and around the world was also an act of genocide. Substantial groups of African people were wiped out on the African continent. Substantial numbers were wiped out in the Middle Passage and killed through the slave trade process. So we have ourselves had genocide inflicted on us, you know. So this charge of genocide is not a hard charge to prove if the people who are adjudicating this are fair. It's interesting to note that the World Court and everything else, they have been more interested in charging Africans with crimes than anybody else. And some of these Africans deserve to be charged. Some of these leaders are terrible, but they got even as terrible or more terrible leaders in the United States. In fact, more terrible, because they've got the power to inflict the punishment, and they're doing it all over the world. Have they been charged? No. You know what I mean? So this is the charge, and South Africa is to be commended for taking this up. And they have a lot of reasons for taking this up. One is the fact that they view the oppression of the Palestinians as being even worse than the apartheid system inflicted on them by the Dutch, the British, and others. You know, they've said so. And in fact, that has been a key charge that's being made throughout the world. And so that's key. America should be charged because they're complicit. They provided the arms. They have blocked any votes inside the United Nations to charge Israel with anything, particularly to stop the bombing. and they've allowed it to continue. And they've even said that this is a price you have to pay to protect Israel. They're treating Israel like they're innocent, like they have not been carrying out a settler colonial system from its beginning. Settler colonialism, by its nature, leads to genocide because any country in which another people come and want to take it, the favored way of taking it is to eliminate the people on the land. So the Australians in Australia largely faced genocide because it's a settler colony. And the United States is a genocidal nation because it's a settler colony nation. They did not have to wipe out all the Native Americans. They didn't have to wipe out any of them. There weren't that many on the land. They could have all lived here together, even though they had no right to be here. This was their land. But genocide was selected as the choice, and so much money was given to whites to either slice off the head or scalp a Native American. And until recent, if you talk to Native Americans, they will tell you it was illegal to be a Native American until recently. And even then, they have the highest rates of every indicator of oppression. The number, we have a large number of young Black women who are kidnapped every year and probably put into some kind of slavery. And we need a system in our community to stop that. And the highest rate for that is among Native American women, and Native Americans in general. They have the lowest life expectancy and every indicator of poverty because they are the conquered people. So we have had charges that our people have presented to the United Nations, charging the United States with genocide. And certainly we fit that category as well. But clearly the Palestinians do. And whatever we can do to support them, we should continue to do it. And by the way, it should be noted, the press is really complicit in this because it's a corporate press, not all of it. There are some radical news outlets like Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! There are others. But for the most part, the press in this country has avoided the term genocide. The press in this country has focused mainly on justifying what Israel's doing because of the Hamas attack on Israel. And as the lawyers from South Africa point out, the fact that the Israelis were attacked by Hamas is no justification for genocide. If you're going to, if you claim that you're carrying out an effort of self-defense, cannot include genocide or excessive force, either way. So this is it. I mean, you turn on the media every day and, you're getting people talking about what's happening there as like it's not that serious, and very little sympathy for the people who are being killed. Very little emphasis on their humanity or anything else. And the majority of people being killed are babies, women, old people, civilians, men. These aren't fighters, and they've killed very few of Hamas. And so it's obvious that if it was their intention to go after Hamas, that's called low intensity conflict. There's a whole way you conduct that. They chose not to because it gave them the excuse to clean out the Gaza. They've said they want to remove all the people from Gaza and remove them into the desert, into Egypt or anywhere else. And the United States, again, by allowing this to go on, have allowed this to happen and then talk out of both sides of their mouth and start talking about lighten up and you can't remove them when in fact you've knocked out all of their housing, and not only housing, hospitals, all their universities have been destroyed, all of them, virtually all the hospitals. They've been bombing them. When doctors are working on patients and people are being operated on the floor. You've seen this on television. So this is beyond tragedy. This is vicious. So whatever you can do to be supportive, because there have been massive uprisings around the world opposing this, be a part of that. Now, I'm starting 2024 with this topic of leadership and then a specific discussion on a particular part of leadership, because this year is definitely going to be a historical turning point. I'm not one to say that lightly. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. This has nothing to do with political parties. But you are facing fascism full-blown if Trump is elected. And you've got problems with the Democrats, as you can see, with their war policies and everything else. But the fact of the matter is, you're at a turning point in history because there's a real likelihood of fascism occupying the White House. And I gave you a little view of it in the Project 2024, which is the Heritage Foundation's plans for the Trump administration, which Trump is involved in. His people are part of shaping these positions. And on the campaign trail, Trump has been stating exactly what he's going to do. You know, he's going to create a dictatorship. He said so. He said a dictatorship. Then he said a one-day dictatorship. And now he's saying it won't be a dictatorship. But that's basically what he plans to do. Fire over 50,000 civil servants, many of whom are Black and brown and people of color, and put in their place people who don't have retirement benefits, medical benefits, or any social kind of backup. And they will have one requirement: to follow the dictates of Trump. And that is what they're planning for each department. And those departments that are providing any services at all to the people, it's basically shut them down. He tried that in the first term, but he was doing it on the fly. Now they've had time to think this thing through. So anyone that says that they don't think that this election is different from any other one, their head obviously is somewhere else. Their eyes are shut and their ears, they're not hearing anything. And so a lot of what this show is going to be doing is not just in reaction to this, but various ways we can move to empower ourselves more as a people. And so that'll be, whatever we cover is going to be a lot of emphasis on that. Now, because we occupy a strategic position in this country, we often don't realize the power that we have. Don't forget that it was the power of Blacks in alignment with a coalition of people, but it was Blacks who put Trump out of the White House. We stopped him from doing his number 4 years ago. And we, along with others, will be the basis for stopping it this time. But we occupy the strategic position of determining whether Trump goes to the White House or the doghouse, whether fascism rears its head up full-blown or not. And if you're looking at Europe, you should see they're already moving in this direction. So don't think that it's a guarantee that he'll be defeated. And it should be clear, with somebody with as many charges as him, and right now ahead in the polls. Now, that doesn't say too much about where things are going to be as this campaign goes on. But the key point is we are going to play a major role in determining whether they win or lose. And you've got some voices out there that are pretending to be black. They're doing everything they can to make sure that blacks don't exercise their vote. And right now, I have no desire to vote. I admit it. Based on what Biden's doing, yeah, I understand that. But I also understand what's at stake here. And if you're political, you should. And if you aren't, check out what's going on around you. So why this topic? Because of all the leadership and organizing traditions in the world, the baddest one, as in good, the most resilient one, the most just one, is the one we have. The African in America, the United States, the African in the Caribbean and South America, deriving from this beautiful leadership tradition that comes out of Africa and then was transplanted into these various places through the enslavement process, but even earlier through the Olmecs and others. The Olmecs were the founders of Mesoamerican civilization. So we have a deep bag to draw from. Leadership organizing bag. It's deep. And that's one of the reasons why when we move, other groups move, because it speaks to not only our needs and interests, but to the needs and interests of oppressed people all over the world. So African people gave birth to humanity and to civilization globally. We're the world's first people. We've covered that. You know that. And our greatness as a people stem from the greatness of our culture. Both the ancient one and what I call the new African one we created here, the one in the Caribbean or South America or Europe or in Asia or in the South Pacific, where our people are as well. So the deepest part of this culture is the deep thought part of the culture. It's the philosophy of the culture. And this is what this discussion is going to focus on, the philosophy of African people and the philosophy of any people, which is the deepest part of their culture, arises from their social structure. This is the key thing to really understand. Social structure specifically defines family structure, and then the structures that grow out of that, because basically social structures give rise to the culture, to the deep thought of the culture, which is the philosophy. It gives rise to the political, the social, the economic, the spiritual systems of a people. And most importantly, the deepest part, the deepest thought of a people. So any people who look at history and focus, say, on economic systems or political systems, but don't start with the social system, has missed the whole thing. I told you I'm not anti-Marxist, but I'm not a Marxist. I'm not anti anything that wants to level the playing field, make it better. But one of the many weaknesses of Marxism is Marx didn't study social structures. Family structures. Engels used Morgan's study of the Iroquois Confederacy, whose social structure is very similar to African social structures. There's a reason for that. But Marx didn't. Yet he's looking at economy. But the first economy for any people grows out of the family. So if you're going to understand a people's culture, the deepest part of which is their philosophy or their economic system or their political system, then you must understand their social system, their family system. That's at the foundation of the whole thing. And since African people gave birth to the world's first social system and the world's first philosophies and the most just social systems and philosophies, then it means that what we have to draw on doesn't just go way back, but it goes way deep. And it's got depths of justice, depths of truth in it. And so that's what the focus of this discussion today is. So the topic is Maat, the philosophical foundation for practicing the art of leadership. Now, I've written a 2-volume work called The Art of Leadership. This is The Art of Leadership Volume 1, and then there's a second volume, Volume 2. They took me 10 years to write. These are the only books in the modern world on African and African American, African Caribbean, African global leadership systems and practices. This is not on great Black leaders. This is on systems. And it's based on, at the time I wrote this book, when it came out in 1990. It was based on 30 years of my own experience, and then the experience of African people in the United States. And then, because these were drafts, because I was using a computer, I could do this. And then the leadership organizing experiences of Africans on the continent. And then the leadership and organizing experiences of any people in the world who have put forward ideas or strategies that work and that are just. So these books have been used by Black Lives Matter, New Black Panther Party, seminaries, various churches, Black student unions, youth groups, whatever. And that's why they were written, because I wanted to pass what I'd gained from my people who woke me up and who, along with my mother and father, really helped shape my consciousness and my skills. So this was an expression of my love and giving this to them. And this book, The Art of Leadership, Volume 2, is available. I only have a few copies of Volume 1, and I only have a few copies of Volume 2. I will be republishing that or reprinting that again. And so you can order that if you want it by clicking on. I know there are a few people that have made book orders and haven't received them. I've just been doing so much, but I will get back and send those books out to you. So some of the comments I'll make today come off of that, but largely these are new comments that are new insights or coming off of certain things that I discussed there, going into them in another way from another perspective. So in various series on this show, I've gone into ancient African civilization and covered areas that historians generally don't cover systematically, with the heavy emphasis on the Twa, because I'm going to the root, and also because the vision that drives the book Return to the African Mother principle of male and female equality led me to the Twa, and not only to their formula and their system for justice, but it also pointed me in the direction of the Twa, because God was showing me they're central for the story of African history, its origin, its development, its growth. And I found that wherever I go, they're at the foundation. If you leave them out, really, you're leaving the foundation of your history out. So the book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, um, pointed to, based on the vision coming from God, to the twin lineal family structure, my term, but the definition of what that is comes directly from God. That is, that male, female, equal empowerment. The vision was societies where all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. That's a breakthrough. No one had seen that before. And it enabled me to really understand the operational basis for just societies, starting with the first, the Twa, starting with the Kung or San people of the Kalahari Desert. But then that serves as the stamp for African civilization and global civilization in general. That's no small thing, because it is not only the description of justice in ancient history, it is the description of why African society since then have produced the amount of justice and kindness that it has. And with the intrusion of colonialism and slavery, this is the model for reconstructing just societies. So anyone that thinks this isn't important is missing the boat. Because again, I say, I'm not anti-Marxist. The Marxists want to equitably distribute the wealth, and I'm not against that, you know. But as I said before, if you don't equally distribute power, it ain't going to be no equitable distribution of wealth. And if you don't look at the social structure, the family structures of the societies that you're bringing about change in the 20th century, it was Russia and China, and then Cuba, under the banner of Marxism. If you don't really look at that and see whether or not that social structure contributes to a just system or is the basis of an unjust one, then whatever you plan to do in terms of equally distributing the wealth is probably going to fail. Because your social structure is the basis for your philosophy, your culture, your political and economic system, and your deep thought. And if your social system is flawed, the way you're going to run a society will be flawed. And if you look at the Russian Revolution, what was the flaw? The biggest flaw was people like Stalin were replicas of the czars. And they did whatever they wanted, killed as many people as they wanted. And in China, which has a more evolved civilization, their leaders were emperors, because that's the nature of Chinese history, but that flows from their social structure. And so if the emperor wants to do right, you might be in good shape. But if he doesn't, you're going to be in trouble, you know, because again, social structure. So the topic for today is Maat, the philosophical foundation for practicing the art of leadership. Maat, the physical foundation, a philosophical foundation for practicing the art of leadership. So to understand leadership traditions and the art of leadership, in this case for African people, we've got to understand then the social structure that it draws from. And I should point out, leadership is an art because it involves the organization of people, the way in which societies are organized. And that's not a science. And so it's an art. And if it's expressed at a high level, then it's a beautiful art because it will produce well-being for the people. But if it is not practiced at a high level, then it can produce a lot of misery for the people. And today, when we are infected by colonialism and slavery, the impacts of colonialism and slavery, and now what's called neo-colonialism or economic colonialism, then cultures themselves are being suppressed and hit by the culture of the oppressors. And so the deeper the level of the penetration into a people's culture by another, then the more difficult it's going to be to extract yourself from that. And that's the problem that Africa faces. China could rise quicker for a lot of reasons. It's a unified country, for one. But one of the others is they didn't face full colonialism. It was colonialism on the borders, semi-colonialism. And so they could come out with more of their culture intact. They got holes in their culture. Confucianism, which is their system, an ethical system laid out by one of their great philosophers, it's being practiced in part because these are different times, and China was hit. They were hit by semi-colonialism. Westerners coming in and dropping opium and stuff on them and trying to conquer them. And then Civil War, the Japanese coming in. And then the Chinese communists having to fight the Kuomintang, which was a gangster operation, and so forth and so on. So China is not drawing from the pure culture of its past. It's drawing from threads, but they got more threads to draw from. And so part of this discussion, the value of it is that we have to draw from the best of our past, in this case, the best of our culture, and revitalize it where it's weak. But I'm going to focus on the core elements that are the basis for our strength. Maat, the philosophical foundation for practicing the art of leadership. So in the case of the leadership systems of Europe, Asia, Native America, the Pacific Islands, the same is true. If you're going to understand their leadership systems, you have to know their social structures. And you might say, well, why am I interested in that? I'm an African. I don't need to know that. You live in the world and you interact with different cultures, and you need to know where they're coming from. You need to know their strengths and their weaknesses. And America is a microcosm of the world. The San Francisco Freedom Movement that I was privileged to lead, one of the great values of taking part in that movement is it was a microcosm of the United States. We had the largest Chinese American population, the only Japanese American community, a large Latino community made up of diverse elements, a youth group, university trained youth, both at San Francisco State and UC Berkeley, one of the best universities for technical training, awarding a lot of Nobel laureates and stuff like that. And then a rich, though small, less than 100,000 Black community. And so, and because I come out of a successful movement that organized most of those elements and defeated the most powerful elements in the power elite, it helped shape my scholarship. You know, successful movements are usually guided by successful strategy, but they help you develop effective thought. So I owe a lot to that. And then 64 years of organizing, you know, and that's been my real classroom, not the university, not a PhD. That was Marcus Bookstore, you know, was my university and the community. And the Art of Leadership Volume 1 is dedicated to Ray Richardson and Julian Richardson, the co-owners of Marcus Bookstore. As I pointed out before, Ray got me, along with Nansisi Caillou, my job at San Francisco State, in spite of what the FBI tried to do, and it got me a job before. And was somebody who, when I went off and made some statement that was wrong, she was quick to correct me. She was a Gemini and very sharp. And then her husband, Julian Richardson, he was the professor to me, to Wade Nobles, to Dr. Asa Hilliard, and many others. And so while the battlefield was like the classroom for me, the big classroom, and my enemy was a real teacher, with my people being the first teacher and my mother and father playing a big role in that. Once you start to open your eyes up, you hit the books. It's hard to do when you're in the midst of struggle, but you start that. And so in discussing the art of leadership, then in my own case, I was beginning to root myself in the best traditions as I began to discover them and de-brainwash myself and move against the miseducation that had been imposed on me, as many others did. So this is the perspective that I come from and continue to come from, and it's my people that I owe this to, everyday Black people, more than anything, and then some well-known. And I've mentioned this once before. One of the best unknowns is a brother named John Dewambia, who had been in the Nation of Islam for a hot minute. He was a Sagittarius. Sagittarius like to speak their mind. And he was a street guy, but well-read and brilliant. And he dressed like a Muslim, walked like a Muslim, looked like a Muslim, but didn't think like one, because he was a free thinker and nobody had any control over his thoughts. So John Dewambia was a person who was constantly working on me. And the brother that woke me up, Norman Brown. And one of the favorite things that John Dewambia would say, because he saw that I was a hardliner, and he'd say, my name was Bill, and he said, Bill, you got to be like the willow tree. The trunk doesn't move, but the branches are flexible. So he was constantly telling me, he pulled my coat on stuff, but he gave me some of my best ideas on organizing. And there were other people like that. Your people are really the source. First, they're the creators of the culture, and they are the source for the best leadership we can produce, the best of anything, the best parents we can produce, the best musicians, the best artists, whatever. It's everyday Black folks, And so that's what I owe where I'm at too. And I don't forget it. And I know that some of the people that you know the least, they're the ones with the most. And the ones who are down deep in the dirt, most oppressed, some of them are the strongest, So that's what really shaped me. And my motive from the beginning has been love, and it's been the truth. And I always told people when I began to assume leadership, don't follow me, follow the truth. If you think I'm wrong, jack me up. Because all I want to do is do what's right. I'm no saint. I'm not perfect. I made my mistake, but I ain't made any in strategy so far. But I know the next battle, if I'm in one, that's the one I could lose. So I don't think I've got any entitlement to win anything. So the topic, Maat, the philosophical foundation for practicing the art of leadership, it's essential to know that the traditions of leadership coming out of Africa and African-American culture grows out of the social structures of Africa, translated and transported into the Americas and throughout the world. And it is from this social structure that the most just systems of leadership arise, if you choose to embrace them. And I'm going to cover how this social structure works in Africa in terms of leadership traditions, and then apply them specifically to the United States and a little bit to the Caribbean. So The hunter-gatherer social structure is the world's first social structure. And as I pointed out, it's based on male-female equal empowerment going back 149,000 to maybe 200,000 years, or maybe longer. Mitochondrial DNA, 149,000 years, 100,000 of which was hunter-gatherer. And then it translates into agrarian systems. I've been covering this before. This is new stuff. You understand? And with a purpose. I'm creating a system for creating just families, communities, and nations or societies. But it starts in this family system. So I call this equal empowerment system twinlineal, and I'm going to be going to this in depth. You think you know it? Some of the people on this show have watched all my shows and read none of my books or just read the introduction. The depth of my stuff is in my writings. That's the depth. And if you're going to understand the twinlineal, you need to read the mother principle in depth. So it is this that is really key. And basically, I've established the fact, and when you go into the mother principle, as I do this in more detail at another time, you will see that Africa is not the zone of matriarchy. Africa is not the matrilineal zone. It definitely isn't the zone of patriarchy or the patrilineal. Matriarchy, societies ruled by women. There are a few. And you can't confuse an Nzinga with matriarchy. This is a case where women came forward, or Ya Santiwa, among the Asante people, and they were the best fighters and leaders of their war parties, and they ran their society. But it wasn't matriarchal. This was not a system that she inherited where women ruled. She happened to be the ruler then, And in the case of Ghana, you had a Bono kingdom where women actually ruled. It wasn't really a kingdom, but a society. They actually had that. But for the most part, the exception proves the rule. And so I systematically established that in the mother principle. You ain't read it. You don't really understand just how solid this is. This is not the matriarchal zone. It is not the patriarchal zone, as Diop argued for Africa. He was wrong, and I show that he was wrong. It's the twinlineal zone. Inclining after hunter-gatherer societies even slightly to the male or more to the male or the female. And in the earliest period, I've shown you through previous shows when we're dealing with classless age grade societies, and I'm going to get into more in this show, that those early societies, the first agricultural societies coming into being out of hunter-gatherer through African women discovering how to cultivate wild crops and turn them into, what would become crops that you grow, or creating an agricultural system. Those societies in the beginning tended to incline towards females, including the formative society of Kemet, which, I've done some shows on. Those incline towards a female, most importantly in its earliest period, where they were closest to these social structure roots coming out of hunter-gatherer societies. So this is important. It also means that Africans had lived under these systems for the longest period in human history. And as a result, this would be almost like in your DNA. So this is really the key to what we would call functional African and African-American families, since a lot of us think our families are dysfunctional. What's really dysfunctional is the economy that has made it impossible for a lot of people to maintain two-parent households due to the low wages. And so now 29% of our families are made up of a husband and wife, but we got all kinds of informal relationships, some of which sustain themselves for a long time. They're just not married. And so what that actual percentage is, we don't know right now. But it's the persistence of this twin lineal model that is key to our family systems, and it is key to every other aspect of how we work, including our leadership systems. So for the world's first people, the Kun, and then later the Chwa, and the Chwa, the Kun, according to mitochondrial DNA, they're the world's first people. And then you have the Chwa coming out of the Congo region. They are the second oldest among this group. And in the expression of this twilineal male-female equal empowerment, they were expressing the highest form of Maat that human beings could express on Earth before we had a name calling it Maat. In fact, they didn't call their systems twinlineal. That's a name I've given to it. And they didn't call their systems matriarchal or matrilineal or patriarchal, none of those terms. Africans lived their systems. And so in the case of the Kun or the Chwa, they were, as they define themselves as pure people. That's their definition of themselves. They were living under a pure social system based on fundamental truths. Fundamental truths. This is the real key thing to understand. So you had a period of human history, over 100,000 years, where people were living heaven on earth. Now, you don't think so because you associate it with skyscrapers, Maseratis, Ferraris. I would say that since I like sports cars. I'm into Corvettes. Bank accounts, fine clothes, big pads, you associate it with that. So when you're talking about some hunter-gatherers, oh, are you kidding? Go back to that, I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting we go back to anything. I'm suggesting you extract the best of what you got in those systems and apply it to your reality today. Me and my wife, we're trying to live a twinlineal family system, two equally strong people, and it works quite good. Because the key to it working is freedom. Each is free to be themselves. That's the real key thing to the whole thing. So a lot of us are practicing this and we don't have a name for it when it works. You got to know how to make this work. And we're going to do some of that in later shows. So for the Kun people and the Chwa in general, as I pointed out before, they define God as a force, in this case, Ilani, a light that lights up the stars, that is the light of God within human beings, which the Mavar call infinite force outside of space and outside of time. Because they were pure people and because they had created a pure social structure, they were in harmony with the forces of God, the forces in rivers and, rocks and plants and everything else that George Washington Carver used to communicate with, but it was a normal conversation for them. And so they're living in this environment, which is an environment of peace. It's an environment of truth. And this is the real key thing for being pure people. And I really want to stress this. This often isn't stressed when we're talking about Ma'at. It's an environment of love because the essence of Ma'at is love. The terms that are used, harmony, truth, balance, justice, right order. The essence of that is love. And as the world's first people, there were mothers and fathers of humanity, the humanity to come, the African humanity and other humans that come after that. And it was the love that they had. They were not concerned about the material thing. They lived with all their needs being easily supplied in plentiful societies. where they were happy. I'm sure that they didn't have high blood pressure, diabetes. Native Americans didn't have it until they put them on a reservation diet. You know, a lot of Africans didn't get it until they started putting McDonald's and Burger King and all the rest, and then stripping them of stuff and putting them in a situation of starvation. So they were living in a heaven on earth, coming from the purity of their values, centered on truth, and coming from a pure social structure that provided balance between males and females, but most importantly, synthesis between masculine and feminine. And so they were constantly interacting with the higher forces, therefore proved to be the most creative people in the world. They created civilization and true civilization. So these were human beings who were the freest people in the history of the world. And then the subsequent agrarian systems that come in are next to them. And those are the ones that Chancellor Williams looked at. They were the next freest in human history. Native Americans and others experienced this as well. So their male-female equal empowerment system that I've labeled or named twinlineal is the best expression of Ma'at on earth. It is the deepest expression of the deep thought of African people. It is why, as when I pointed out in previous shows, when the Bambara talk about an ideal human being, they call him Ma. And in Kemet, they called him Jeruma, Gerumaa. Only the T is left out. Again, this universal conception of a human being, which is a peaceful person, generally a silent person, a person who is in communion with the higher forces, and is a person who is a model of compassion, of kindness, and of being a human being. For the Kemites, Ma'at is associated with their founding ancestor Asar, known to the Greeks as Osiris. And we hear the use of this term Ma'at first with him and with his wife Aset at the time in which he is assuming the office of Pharaoh, and she is the Shepsut, which they didn't have a term for Queen Mother. Shepsut, which is the term for the women who are agriculturalists that I've covered before. And so the emergence of Pharaonic civilization, or their art of leadership, where governance is traced to a royal person, it's centered on the masculine-feminine interaction coming out of the twinlineal systems. It's an expression of that. And so the source of Pharaonic leadership is the feminine. It's the female. It's she who is the royal mother, the royal wife. And no man can assume office except through her. So it's no accident that when you see a picture of Aset, her symbol is the throne of the Pharaoh over her head, meaning she's the source. And so it's this masculine-feminine interaction. No Shepsut, no Pharaoh. The same is true in the Asantehene Santewa traditions in Inner Africa. No king without the Queen Mother. And in fact, she recommends him for office because they don't base their leadership on, birth. They base it purely on worth, the best person. And it's a Queen Mother who will recommend to the council of the Asantehenes and the Asantewa, the Asantehene king, Asantewa queen, she will recommend the one who was the best male for that job. But he can't be installed until she schools him in the art of leading in the Asante system. And he's destooled if any evening he fails to consult her, or any morning he does. And she is responsible for calling him out in public. She's not his mother. There's no conflict of interest there. So it's an interaction of masculine and feminine when you're in societies that are not directly ruled by males and females. But I should point out, at the village level, they were ruled by males and females. This is the system coming out of the social structure of Africa. Their leadership structure emerges. So to know the meaning of Maat is the philosophical foundation for the art of leadership in ancient and dynastic Kemet, is to know the relationship of Pharaoh to Shepsut in the case of Kemet, or Asantehene to Asantewa in the case of Ghana, or in the case of the Yoruba, the Oba, and those women who play a role, the eldest, wisest woman and eldest, wisest man who make the recommendation in traditional times for the position of Oba, or king. Again, male, female, masculine, feminine interaction. Chancellor Williams described the classless age-grade societies as the birthplace of democracy, and these were societies with no kings and queens. I pointed out that he's right, that these were democracies without kings and queens, but that's not the birthplace. Hunter-gatherers are. You gave birth to democracy in the world, true democracy, which is where males and females make the decisions in society, not just having a vote at election time, and very often women not in the picture. So if you're going to look at the art of leadership in Africa, the democracy that is key to the exercise of the art of leadership in Africa has come through a male-female consensus. And historians generally agree that consensus is the basis for decision-making to this day in African societies, even though not practiced, because you're usually following the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and corrupt leaders who are armed to the teeth. At the village level, when people make decisions, they're generally drawing from this. And so the democracy that you're finding in classless age-grade societies, where societies are organized according to age, and everybody gets to pass through each phase of that if they live long enough, including that of being elders. This is an outgrowth of the male-female equal empowerment found in hunter-gatherer societies. And so democracy is really key. Next to spirit, democracy is a core element of African and African-American culture. You got to have a say-so. First, it's a spirit. And secondly, it's your ability to freely express yourself. And so leadership systems that work best for us are those where leaders are mouthpieces for the people. Martin Luther King said when he was leading the Montgomery bus boycott, he didn't initiate that boycott, but when the people called on him, he was a mouthpiece for the people. King wasn't always democratic. I mean, his organization, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was made up of ministers, and they made some major decisions within that group. It wasn't like they were going into communities and asking them what you want, but they were responding to what people wanted. They were responding to the truth. People wanted an end to the humiliation of segregation. They wanted the right to vote. They wanted to be treated as human beings. And so King, as he said, he was a mouthpiece for that. And that was his strength. His strength was that he stuck to the truth most of the time. On essentials, he didn't compromise. And that's how he could evolve from a reformist who was appealing to the conscience of America to a revolutionary that wanted to restructure it. So the hunter-gatherer society gives birth to societies in which there are no leaders. All the people are leaders. And in turn, the classless age grade societies follow that model. In the African American situation, we bring these leadership traditions into the Western Hemisphere, in this case, the United States. And so what you find in the United States, in enslavement, you had different types of leadership, one of which is the Nat Turner type, which is inspired by Spirit. And Spirit gave him the direction for his organization, that is his organization of the slave revolt, led by him. It came through visions. And this is again going back to Spirit as really the foundation for the deep thought, which is at the heart of Maat and truth. And so what he thought was God, and I believe it was, telling him through showing him signs, blood on the leaves and stuff, that he was supposed to lead a rebellion. It was to pursue the truth. Ma'at on earth. He didn't call it Ma'at, but that's what it was. So it's a carryover of these traditions. So in this case, he was the leader, but he was serving as a mouthpiece and a bloody arm for the liberation of his people. And he was sending a message to his oppressors. In post-Reconstruction, when the right to vote had been torn up, Blacks were living under segregation, then you had people like Henry Adams, who had been a Civil War veteran, who, like many others, was going from plantation to plantation, organizing Blacks, teaching them how to read and write, finding out what they wanted. And so as a leader, he was serving in that role as a mouthpiece for the people. And that was really how his leadership worked. For everyday Black people in post-Reconstruction, Louisiana or Mississippi or many other places in the Deep South, where you really had hardly no protection. The Klan was riding, violence was everywhere. Blacks would get together sometimes for 2 weeks and go into the woods and debate their options. And when they came up with an option, it was based on consensus. That was the male-female system coming out of Africa. And then they would take somebody who they called a representative man of color, someone with a little education that could read and write, talk white people's talk, and send them to the whites to give them their decision. The whites thought they were leaders. But as I note in my book, The Art of Leadership, Blacks at that time did not consider themselves to have any national leaders, because to be a leader, you had to live with the people, know what they wanted, and express their interests. So while Frederick Douglass was considered a leader during the Civil War and during the early period of Reconstruction, he was living a better life. He was living in Washington, D.C., living well. He wasn't living among the everyday people. And while he was respected, the average Black person would say he was not a leader. They would say, we have no leaders except those who are among us, and then they are mouthpieces for us. And then they would say, to hear Frederick Douglass, you had to pay to hear him, you know, because he was a public speaker, you know, and that's not exactly what Black folks consider to be leadership. that you got to pay to hear your own leaders. So what we're seeing is then in this system, this idea of leaderless groups that was being applied. The hunter-gatherers had no leaders. Everybody had a say-so. And the classless age grade societies had no leaders. Everybody had a say-so. So they were applying that under circumstances in which it worked quite well. And it also reflected the social structure of that time, where men and women were working their behinds off, usually under a sharecrop system, where survival depended upon the cooperation of both. And that led to a stable family structure, though you were poor. The majority of our families, 2 parents. And you couldn't survive unless both of you were cooperating with each other. And a person's word meant something. You hear me? So honor was a big part of it. So this was the twinlineal system translated to the United States with all kinds of contradictions in it because of the nature of the oppression that we faced. When we looked at a king before, he said he was a mouthpiece for the people. At the same time, they called him in the movement the Lord because he carried himself regally. His name was King. He carried himself that way. And his organization, and particularly him within it, had a big say-so in what they did. So with King, you can see both the marriage of the pharaonic system where you have a certain amount of royalty involved in the way in which leadership is being exercised, and democracy. I call that royal democracy. So the great strength of a king was that he listened and he learned. And he was dedicated to the truth. I was listening to an interview with Dick Gregory on one of the YouTube channels. And the interviewer was asking him, what did he consider to be King's most important quality? He said, he learned. He grew. Why? He was following the truth. Taking a stand against the war in Vietnam was speaking a truth that could lead and did lead, along with his poor people's orientation, to the loss of his life. And he knew it, But he stuck to the truth. King never referred to Maat. He lived it, though. You hear me? You can't consider Malcolm X without the social structure that shaped him. Everyone puts the emphasis on Malcolm, and Malcolm made a great contribution. But without his family, Malcolm was nothing. It was his family that exposed him to Garveyism. And then it was his oldest brother, Wilford, who basically organized the family to organize Malcolm into the Nation of Islam. His awakening, triggered by Reginald coming in and telling Malcolm that the white man's a devil, that was a social structure. That was a family affair. The family engineered that. You hear me? So if you don't understand Malcolm, you better understand the social structure he came out of. And then he made some mistakes because he saw the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as a father figure. That wasn't so much a mistake, but more like a God, and no human being is that, other than that we have God within us. But the key point is, as he grew and broke out of those constraints, he became even stronger. If we look at the sit-in movement that occurred among Black youth in the South, Ella Baker made the point that, and it was over 50,000 Black youth taking part in that. That was an expression of the extended family community. It was the extended family community networks that made the sit-in movement possible. So if you're going to understand the pursuit of truth and justice under circumstances where you could lose your life, as the youth and the movement did, you have to understand social structure. And then if we look at Black Lives Matter, look at that. We're in a situation where marriage rates are down, extended family community networks are weakened by drugs. The load is heavily placed on Black women. And we see them coming up with some old systems under new circumstances. Group-centered leadership under different circumstances. The breakdown of social structures is leading to a new kind of interaction, masculine and feminine, sometimes within females, and then male and female within males and females. And they're creating leaderless structures on the surface, or as Black Lives Matter calls them, full of leaders, but not easily identified, suited for the circumstances. But the best leaders in this movement know they're drawing from the classless age-grade societies, and some of them know they're drawing from the hunter-gatherer societies. So even when it appears we're at our weakest point, we're able to draw from the strengths of this culture. And the key is the dedication to the truth. And to the extent that our leadership traditions are grounded in what Africans refer to as speak truth, do truth, to the extent that they are, then we create non-compromising leadership. And that leadership is able to be flexible and to respond to systems of oppression and come up with new strategies and tactics. And that's what we have to draw from today. So the topic for today was Maat, the philosophical foundation for practicing the art of leadership. In the end, the best leaders you have are your parents. Those who are close to you, those who have provided direction to you, ideas, and support for you in the pursuit of your life. And so in this age, the best expression of our leadership traditions is for all of us to see that we have a role to play in leadership at our level, based on what we're good at. We can make our contribution that way. And when you do that, you're going to create a new mix. You're going to come up with new ideas, and this is going to be a part of what produces your liberation. This does not mean that we don't need organizations. We do. It does not mean that we don't need any kind of structure. We do. But it means that at most fundamental level, there's a rule that strong people don't need strong leadership. And weak people too often are drawing too much on strong leadership. And in the age of the internet, false realities are created. And people think that because something has been whispered into their ear on the internet and has not been proven to be true, they can fall for it. And that's one of the real dangers of what we're facing now. Facing fascism, there are some of us who can be talked into the idea that that ain't the problem. In fact, we don't need to be doing anything. Both systems are bad. Both political systems, there's some truth in that. But when you're faced with the situation of a lockdown of a type that goes back to not just Jim Crow, but slavery, and when they say make America great again, if you don't know what that means, then shame on you. Because they mean they want those good old days. Clarence Thomas, talking about he wants to go back to original construction. In other words, translate the Constitution the way it was when it was written. Well, that was slavery, brother. You know what I mean? Huh? Just because they've given you a chance to articulate this and, taking you out on yachts and put you in nice hotels and giving you money to pay your mother's house off and, a relative's education. Is that the price you pay for the liberation of your people? Which you don't seem to be concerned about. So, Maat, the philosophical foundation for practicing the art of leadership, in essence, it's based on loving yourself. And if you love yourself, then you're going to pursue the truth. And you're going to pursue what is best, not only for you, but for your people and humanity. And so you've got a rich culture to draw from. Draw from it. Hotep. Any comments here? I see any questions or comments or whatever. Okay, let's see what we have here. Michael Mayberry. Ogawa, make America gringo again, yeah. Yeah, you're right. Amilcar Cabral is the best example of that. You see his picture behind me. Mastered both thought and action. Okay. Oh, here we are, Lao Tzu. Question, Dr. T'Shaka. Even the Chua call themselves the pure people. It seems they develop no philosophy of dealing with chaos, the emergence of individuals or groups motivated by destruction. That's not true. In fact, the anthropologists that studied them and didn't know what they were looking at referred to their societies as chaos because they didn't have, formal institutions like a legislature where they met and debated things. This was on the spur of the moment. And they would hammer things out. If they're going on a hunt, then they hammered that out, whatever it was. And what they were able to do was maintain peace within the hunting band. And, of course, there was going to be some discord and disagreement, but they had to settle it. Why? Because if they didn't, they wouldn't eat. Because hunter-gatherers operated generally on what they gained each day. And there was plenty of wild stuff growing in the ground to get, which was a woman's job. They were the gatherers. So they did that every day. Hunting meat, you weren't always guaranteed that you were going to bring home meat. So, the woman played a more consistent, reliable role in that. But they were able to handle that. Now, if you're talking about groups motivated by destruction, that's another period in history. That period didn't exist when their societies were in operation, which was global. And they were able to defend themselves. And if you note, when they found Kemet, which they make the decision when they transition to the agrarian system, and they make the decision to create an agrarian system, they were able to protect it. And it's a 10,000-year-old system. So, they were able to handle that. So don't think that these were naive people that didn't understand what was going on in the world. But there was a period that was the Chua period of history. And you didn't have groups motivated by destruction. Now today you do. So when you adapt that to today, you got to be able to protect it. If you think that I don't think that, you ain't been listening to nothing I'm saying, and I know you know that ain't me. You know, I'm not advocating nothing that's turn the other cheek and let's be happy and love everybody. No, you know, whatever you create, you've got to defend it. If it's an economic system, you got to defend it. If it's a political system, you got to defend it. If it's your family, you better be prepared to defend it. And I don't just mean a lot of talk. You better have in place right now systems for doing that. You know, so don't think that because the system is just, it can just be run over. No, you know. In fact, that's the strongest system when it's organized properly. We had problems. I mean, you know, with the coming of the European, for example, the technology of gunpowder and stuff put us in a position where the technology did us in. Bullets, those that made the bullets and made the guns. Our blacksmiths were able to make guns, but not on a mass level, and had not perfected, you know, the long range capacity of those weapons. So that was a weakness, and that put us in the position we were in. Other people, like the Chinese who invented gunpowder, they had cannon, but they didn't, in the beginning, integrate guns and cannon into their regular military formations. And they went to a period of isolation where they were not in contact with the rest of the world. And so when they see these ships arriving on their shores, they're unprepared. And their system is undergoing erosion. They had a unified system. It was corrupt. It was outdated. And so, you know, you end up with what you have today. You know, the Chinese had a civil war and everything else. So, you know, you've got to be up on what's going on in the world. And while you draw from the best of your systems, you got to draw from the best of whatever's going on in the world that can be useful for your development. And we're in the storehouse of technology, even though it's in decline. We should be drawing from as much of that as we possibly can. We got the best educated group of Africans in the world, but we could be better educated. And I just want to say, the philosophy of the Twa is at the core of all African philosophies. And all other philosophies that are really balanced draw from that, particularly in the world of color. So it's a flexible system that's very good at handling that, but it has to be updated to today. What correlation could be found between Garveyism and Maat? Garvey never used the term Maat. Most of us in the 60s didn't either. We didn't know about it, but we used, you know, we were into the truth. And I would say that Garvey was at his best when he was speaking to the truths that affected African people. And he was at his best when he was speaking to the anti-war sentiment that you found among Africans in America and throughout the world, but in the United States, some of whom had fought in World War I and came back disillusioned because some of their leaders, like Du Bois, had told them to fight to make the world safe for democracy and things would be better at home. And when they got back home, they saw the bloody summers. That was whites who were coming back from the war and trying to kill them. They were shooting back. They were defending themselves. So Garvey was at his best when he was speaking to the feelings and needs of the people. And he was able to launch his movement based on that. And to the extent that he stuck to that, he was in his best position. And of course, the harder the times were, the better it was for organizing. The easier the times were, the harder it was for organizing. But things were never that easy, you know. Lao Tzu, what does the philosophical application of Maat to the economic, social, and political conditions we currently face reveal and lead us to? First of all, while I use the twinlineal thing as the best expression of Ma'at on earth, I don't want to get so lazy that we're just falling back on Ma'at. It's important. It is foundation for African philosophy, grounded in truth, justice, right order. It's a rudder of heaven, the beam of earth. So it's a directional force. If um, governments, economic systems, and whatnot were observing this, we wouldn't have global warming right now. So I don't want to dismiss this. This is very important. But when I was making the comment that the twinlineal system is the best expression of Ma'at on earth, I meant that. What I meant was that the balance that we have in the twinlineal system is the basis for empowering people to have power over their lives. And while the system isn't based on that, you can use that in your communities. And that has to be the basis for organizing in your communities, where the people have the say so. And so economically, cooperatives are the best format for that, where everybody has a say so in the organization of whatever kind of system we want to create. The housing that we built in the 60s, Ken Garvey, that was converted to cooperative. Businesses, plenty of businesses are going to be individually owned because of the nature of how things work. Blacks can't get financing from banks and stuff, and they're going in on a shoestring on their businesses. But when we get people to pool their money, and as in the Caribbean, they have what they call partner, which is in Jamaica and other parts of the Caribbean, where people pool money and pass it around and then have to pay it back. That's a way to finance things. But that's again based on male-female support, assuming that both are involved in that organization. Social organization. If we're going to rebuild the Black family, and I'm going to be going into this a lot more, then it's going to be a question of how do we create interaction between brothers and sisters in a way that they can both contribute to what's going on, both in terms of love and respect, but in decision making, in building their families, raising their children, and creating the kind of systems that we need to empower us in a larger society. So everything that I talk about, I try and practice, and it is something you can live right now. This is not some far off thing you got to wait until you have a twinlineal society. No, you can have them in your family. You can begin to do it in your community. Churches that follow this, because a lot of them are male-centered with 75% females, they'll get more men involved, And it's the churches that do that get the most men involved, because they see that this is not a system just for the preacher, But they're both involved, and that is usually churches where there's a real respect for women, and men can come in and feel comfortable and not worry about a preacher trying to prey on their wives. And it's the same thing in the larger political movements. That's key. So there's a lot of strategies that we need to adopt to empower ourselves, and this is real key. I'm not going into this right now, but there are systems for empowerment, so that they try on you what they're doing with the Israelis I mean, with the Palestinians through the Israelis, you got some answers for that, and they have tried some stuff on us, drop bombs on our community and everything else. So there are strategies for that. Komazar, the best of all masters is the best of all servants. The nature created master servant serves the creation. Yeah, very true. Leaders are followers. Teachers are students and students are teachers. So yeah, you're right. Ashley Jimenez, in this context, that is a scary thing to do. Stick to the truth. However, I am being taught here today that it is our culture to do so. Thank you for that. Yeah, it is your culture. And none of us are perfect. And one reason why you want to spread power out in groups and why in families, everybody has, husband and wife have a say so equal. One of the reasons is ain't none of us perfect. And we all make mistakes. And sometimes we do wrong. You know what I mean? It's got to be corrected. And you got to have a way to be corrected, And that's real love. And so the twin lineal model is part of what that is. Uben Tugogus. Should we also study Maulana Karinga's Ma'at, the moral ideal in ancient Egypt, a study in classical African ethics? Is that worth taking a look at? Yeah. For Blacks, it's the most thorough book that Blacks have written on that subject. And Maulana Karinga, reads Medu Neter. He's talented, and he's also disciplined in terms of his work. He puts a lot of time into research. It's a good book. It's lacking, though, and in part it was because this is his second PhD and he's getting it in ethics, but partially because of his own inclination. It is lacking in spirit. The deep stuff that comes out of African culture is in the spirit component. And so generally when he's talking about these, he doesn't spend much time on them. And that's too bad. Because while Ma'at is an ethical system, it's much more. It's a rudder of heaven and the beam of earth. It's an invisible force that provides a direction for the cosmos on multidimensional levels. It applies to every level. So that's a weakness. But I think that in terms of the thoroughness of it, there's a lot of thoroughness. But when you're dealing with a concept that comes out of a society that is based on spirit, leaving the spirit out, I think, is a mistake and a weakness. But other than that, it's a good book. I use it for reference. It's a good reference book for me, Cha Jomo Kenyatta. I found some Olmecs in Wallow, Virginia in the 1600s, named after Maat and Ptah, the Mishah Olmecs, and Ptah Olmecs. They just disappeared. Oh, that's interesting. I never heard of that. I'm going to check that out. If you can, send me anything you got on that, Ashley Jimenez. looking at social work leadership models, all based on the philosophical foundations of Eurocentric ideas. Yes, and usually patriarchy and racism at the foundation, you know. Ashley Jimenez, leadership is organization of people versus the organization of agency. Yeah, that's a good point. And Ashley, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you hit the subscriber button. I'm glad to have you on the show. This is a good question. At what age can Ma'at be introduced to children? At the earliest age possible. Because that's basically what our parents raised us on. Truth. Truth. They might have used some methods to instill it that maybe need to be changed a little bit, you know, what they call heavy manners in the Caribbean, you know, getting your butt whipped and stuff. But no, that's the foundation for socialization in our families, is the truth, you know. And that's what Black parents value most, is being a good person. They value that the most. Showing kindness and love, and being a good human being. That is what they value most. So yeah, Ma'at can be introduced as soon as a child can talk, and it's being introduced by the love and the care and the kindness that you show, and then seeing that children practice what they speak, which means that you and I have to, you know. Chad, I'm glad you're reading those books. And my book will be out this year on the master and the master's system, and also our system for teaching. Okay, this is Ann Bowles. Looking forward. Genocide in Gaza, and while speaking of domestic affairs, is on a different note. I see interrelatedness where there are the undesired genocide can be finessed. We need to brace ourselves for action that will most certainly come with the reinstating of Trump if that takes place. If not, we are looking at potential of Kamala if Biden makes history as first to leave office of natural cause. Yeah, that's the only way she's going to be president. Yeah, that's a possibility, you know. Alexandria White, I see a lot of nihilism and apathy within the Black community. We can't forget that at least 10% of Black men were radicalized by Trump. Sometimes it seems like folks want to hasten the social collapse promised by a fascist Trump administration. That's a good point. That's a good point. Because, Alexandria, what you're saying is some people who are more progressive or radical, not just Blacks, but whites and other groups, find some of Trump's language appealing because he'll talk about the deep state and going against the deep state. And that sounds like a lot of the stuff that the left or radicals talk about. But what does he mean by the deep state? He means all those institutions that benefit the masses of people. That's what he means by deep state. He's not talking about cutting the military industrial complex. He's not talking about defund the police. He's not talking about anything that really rains violence on the heads of the oppressed. He's not talking about that. And so Blacks who might think that this language sounds radical, no, it's not, you know. And that's why Trump's been able to get away with quite a bit after January 6th because part of the elite in this country doesn't object to what he did. Part of it did, but his base kept them in check. Mitch McConnell was told by the Koch brothers to get him. Mitch McConnell is a product of the Koch brothers, a multi-billionaire family. They have been backing anybody but Trump in these things that are going on right now in the Republican Party. But it's not working. And what will happen, just as they did not back him when he ran for president and got elected the first time, they jumped into his administration because they saw that he didn't have too many ideas of where to go, so they're going to help guide it. So it's interesting. There's a sector of the right that doesn't like him because he's gone too far. I mean, you'd think all of them wouldn't. I mean, he's going to try and overthrow an electoral system. Now, they'll cheat and steal elections, but when you're going to go and try and stop that system the way he did, you would think most of them would be up in arms. No, but his base is loyal to him, and that base doesn't care what he does because as far as they're concerned, he's sticking it to the system when he's not. This point of nihilism. That's an interesting point, and definitely apathy. Some people feel like they have no purpose in life and that life has no meaning for them. And in part, this arises from the fact that they're living in a system that is really providing nothing for the masses of the people. Rents are constantly going up. The cost of everything, including food, is through the ceiling. Homelessness is on the rise. Violence is all around you. There are some youth that are coming out of that, and particularly those that are coming out of broken social structures, But some of what looks like nihilism isn't nihilism. There's a saying on the street, I'm not afraid to die, I'm afraid to live. That the circumstances of life have become so bad that a lot of people just don't see a hope in it. And so that's where building power in the Black community can offer alternatives. Because it's the people who are on the bottom that have the greatest potential to produce change. But they've got to see where that change can come from in their own community. And that's got to be organized. That's a very good point. And then, of course, there's a sector of Black male youth that have a kind of gangster mentality. And so Trump acts like a gangster, so he looks appealing for that. And many of them are not aware of the details of what Trump did when he was in office, what Biden's infrastructure plan and stuff is. They don't know any of that. And most of them just know the bad stuff he's done, which is put a lot of Blacks in prison and a whole lot of other stuff. They know that, but they don't know a lot of other stuff, so they ain't that political. So, yeah, that's a problem. Got to be corrected by organizing. Not just for that, but for empowering our own people. First time here in a doctoral of social work program. She's in a doctoral social work program and doing dissertation on how Maat and ethical moral code for social work leadership. Already learning so much. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Social work, it's a helping profession, and people who are in it, they certainly aren't in it to get rich. The people they serve aren't rich, and they ain't getting much of anything when it comes to a paycheck. But when it comes to being able to help people, if they are coming out of a culture that cares, it's very good. Spirit traveler. The police said that the cardboard boxes are coffins. This they are tricked out of the march. Thank you, for allowing us to see what's going on. Okay. Spirit Traveler, good after Dr. T'Shaka and family, going on now in Orlando. The police have tricked out Dr. Wote and his team from marching against the current wars. So, brothers referring to a part of the opposition that's going on at street level against what's happening to the Palestinians and the police moving against it. You got to fight. The Israelis say that the Torah and Holy Bible, God gives them the right to genocide. Will that statement stand up in a court of law? Good question. Let's see up here. Tyrone Triggs, Hotep, Brother T'Shaka. I appreciate your teaching since way back in the day when you would come and do lectures at Merritt College. Dr. Arrington just came to mind. Dr. Arrington, for people who don't know, was the first chair of Black Studies at Merritt College that the Panthers, particularly the Soul Students Advisory Committee, initiated through getting into the curriculum the first course on Black Studies, out of which later came the Black Studies Department. I enjoyed that too. So, right on, Tyrone. Yeah, Lao Tzu makes the point that John Kirby and Anthony Blinken have called the South African case as having no merit. And of course, Blinken himself is Jewish. Yeah. And, this murder and everything else that's going on, they act like nothing's happening. Gregory Jones. Try it now. Well, in fact, you should be able go back, Gregory Jones, go back and I don't know about a bundle pack, but go back and buy each book, and you can get them through Gumroad. That's how people have been buying books. So other people, it's worked for them. Go back and buy each book at a time and see how that works. Oh, BB Gina from Texas, right on. I got a lot of family in Texas. Okay. Wow, good questions and good comments. Very perceptive. See what's down here. Hi, a heckler of the Jews forced the university principal to resign, said she was anti-Semitic. I think you're referring to the head at Harvard. Yeah. That was a setup. Ashley Jimenez, what part does fear play in the slowing of recognizing and acting on our cultural roots? Fear is a major, she probably means problem in our community, and with just cause. Subscribed, liked, and hooked. Yeah, true. Fear is a myth. Fear is not real, but it's made real by it being drummed into our heads, by the system trying to constantly instill it in our hearts. But it's not real. Babies don't come into this world fearing anything. And fear, as I pointed out many times before on this show, is the greatest obstacle to growth, especially spiritual growth, because wherever you have fear, you're frozen there. And fear is far worse than anything that you think you're facing. And I know there's a special saying on this. My wife has quoted it. I don't remember the saying, but it basically says that fear is an illusion. But it's an illusion that's alive and well. And everything has positives and negatives. So a lot of people think that without fear, they wouldn't be the good people they are. Really? You don't need fear to be truthful. You don't need fear to be kind. And you can't love something that you fear. It's going to get in the way of love, you know? So fear is something you need to work on. It's work on it. Whatever your area of fear is, work on it. I was watching a film earlier this week, and it was a sister. She's in a family that the father's a deacon in the church, and you know the father and mother have a real good, loving relationship and stuff. And she was a favorite daughter, and they went to church regularly. He's a deacon. She didn't, you know. She was more of a free spirit. And then one day she tells her family that God has told her she's living in Texas. She could go to another place in Texas and work on a farm. It was really a ranch where they used horses to deal with autistic children and others that had issues. Now, the thing about her is she didn't like any kind of animal. She was afraid of them and didn't like them and didn't like children. So when she told her father, oh, father, that's his favorite daughter and he's going to lose her. And so he's thinking, well, yeah, God told you, huh? But later he told her, it looks like God did tell you because you're addressing the fears you have, the fear of animals. And she overcame the fear of animals through tending to horses, which she had to be able to do to deal with autistic children who are going to be petting horses and riding them and stuff like that. And then eventually to dealing with autistic children. But she did it by facing her fear, by dealing with it, you know? And that's what we often have to do because a lot of this fear is designed to keep you in check and under control. That's all what fear is about, you know? Yeah, Ubin to Gogist. I know I'm messing your name up. Theophil Obenga has 25 dimensions of Maat in his book, Icons of Maat. I hope that he republishes that book. I might fill in the gaps of Karinga. It might fill in the gaps of Karinga's work. Yeah, Dr. Obenga has a multi-dimensional view of Maat. I didn't do that today because I'm focusing on leadership, but he's showing how Maat applies to every domain of life, the universe, the family, governance systems, economic systems, and so forth. It's a very comprehensive one. And also what I like about Obenga is it's from his perspective. So it's original. You know, you're seeing his own thoughts. And he is the best person on dynastic Kemet in the world today. And if you go back and look, I did a conversation with him. I hired him at San Francisco State in 1998, and he stayed there until 2011. And if you go and look at the conversation we had, it was also at the time in which he had persuaded the president of Congo, it's a little Congo, to build a university. And they had just opened it. You'll see in that discussion, that university, they have 10,000 students. They want to have, I think it's 40,000. and I'm working on getting him back on the show. Binga's a beautiful brother. He stayed at my house for 4 months, and we're buddies. I really love the brother. He's a good man, you know. He's a typical African for all that what that means. Okay, let's see if there's anything else down here. Komazar, the musician, asked the cabbie, "How do I get to Carnegie Hall?" The cabbie told him, "Practice, practice, practice. We are best at what we practice most. Practice facing, learning, practicing the truth." Yeah, true, true. Um, that's what life is. Life is basically the pursuit of the truth. Your truth, not meaning the truth is relative, but we all have gifts. We're all here on our own mission. And so it's also pursuing your truths if you're a musician that way, an artist, whatever. And often it's not through a profession. It's just through doing the things that can help others, you know. But it is the pursuit of the truth and always sticking to it. That will keep you at a point where you're not corrupted, you know. And that was a quality of a Malcolm X or a Paul Robeson, who Dizzy Gillespie said were his favorite heroes because they were non-corruptible, you know. And you know, that's the quality of being a good human being. And then if you happen to be a giant like them, fine. But whatever you're doing, that makes you a giant, because good character is everything. That's what gets you into heaven. Not your bank account or all the impressive things you may have done on earth. Of course, it will help get you in if they're helping others or good for humanity and good for your people. But it's pursuing the truth, you know, and going wherever it leads you to. And that's the joy of life, you know. You'd be surprised where you end up in this journey called life. Kamazar, there are only two fears that we are born with: sudden drops and sudden loud noises. We can even unlearn those fears. All other fears are learned. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, it's true. Somebody drops a sound on you, you might jump or something. You know. But then again, if you're in a cool and peaceful place, you'll probably turn around and be alert like a cat. You know, you don't know what that sound is. Yeah, good character allows you to make heaven on earth. You got that right. That's the joy of everything. Surround yourself with people who have good character. You know, practice it yourself and work on your shortcomings. We all got them. You know. Okay, and I'm really happy to see some new people who have come in on this, and we got some other things going that we're cooking up. And until next week, Hotep, peace. And I've enjoyed this. Some heavy people here.